Story 1. I was working at a work site a few years ago when I stirred up a large cloud of dust and some dry fungal spores drifted deep into my ear canal. I went home and took a long, steaming hot shower. Less than 24 hours later, I experienced ear pain, so I went to an urgent care clinic where they prescribed antibacterial ear drops. Because this was a fungal infection, the drops did nothing and made the problem worse by killing the bacteria that kept the fungus in check. 2 days later, I was in absolute agony and could not sleep or lie on my back. It felt like a red-hot wire was being twisted through my eardrum toward my brain. Eventually, I reached an ear, nose, and throat clinic, where they flushed very large masses of black fungus from my ear and then prescribed topical clotrimazole to kill the rest. The intense physical pain, combined with the psychological disgust of knowing my eardrum was being colonized and damaged by fungus, was unbearable. Story 2. This will not be relatable to most people or even sound as awful as it is, and probably does not compare to the intense, life-altering pain others have experienced, but it is my specific worst physical pain. An ear infection. I had a very bad bacterial ear infection that I could not shake. Initially, my ear had a constant, slight, needle-like pain that intensified to about 5 to 6 out of 10 if I pushed in my ear with my finger. This was followed by a clogged feeling that muffled my hearing and threw my balance off a little. I went to urgent care and received antibiotic drops since they confirmed it was bacterial. That helped for a week. I kept using the drops and then the pain and other symptoms returned. I went to my general practitioner and she again said it was a really bad bacterial infection. She prescribed oral antibiotics, which I took for about a week and a half. The infection went away and then came back, this time at about 8 out of 10. My ear was completely deaf, and when I touched it, it was so sensitive that any slight poke was intensely painful. I could not eat or sleep because chewing or lying down aggravated it. The deafness, fullness, and ringing tortured me. One morning, after receiving more antibiotics from an emergency visit to urgent care, I touched my ear and fell to my knees in pain. I started to cry, a grown man on the floor at my wit's end. I called the ear, nose, and throat specialist that my general practitioner had given me and urgently explained how dire it was. They asked if I could be there in 30 minutes, and I flew to the appointment. The specialist examined my ear and said it was not bacterial but fungal. Apparently, when a bacterial infection is fought off and the environment inside the ear is right, fungus can grow and infect it. Most ear infections are bacterial, but mine was fungal. He said he would prescribe antifungal drops and, because my ear was so infected, he wanted to vacuum out the spores. I agreed. He prepared a small suction device with a thin nozzle and began to suction my ear. When the device touched my eardrum for a second, an immense, sharp, electrical jolt ran through my body. It felt as if every nerve ending signaled pain at once. For that second, my body tensed and jolted involuntarily. I could not think or comprehend my own consciousness. The doctor apologized and continued, and he accidentally nicked my ear again, producing the same 12 out of 10 pain, the worst pain I had ever felt. After the small procedure, my ear felt unmuffled for the first time in weeks, maybe a month, and the pain dropped to about 3 out of 10. I almost fell asleep in the chair from relief and adrenaline. Antifungal ear drops cleared the infection in 2 days. It felt basically gone after 1 day. Story 3. Being engulfed in flames. A burn survivor. Because my post is still getting attention, I want to mention ways you can support burn survivors. I will include the Phoenix Society. They help many survivors across the country and send children with burn injuries to camp. Many children who have burn injuries face body dysmorphia, ridicule from peers who do not understand, and long-term challenges. Please consider supporting the Phoenix Society. If you would like to support more locally, many hospitals accept donations of blankets, hats, and similar items for children, including baby blankets for newborns. Please consider donating, especially if you can make these items yourself. Thank you for all the support. I did not expect this to receive so much attention. Sending you all love because I truly love this community. Story 4. When I was 12, my dad kicked me in the face while wearing his boots. He was at the top of the basement stairs and I was a few steps below him. He knocked out 4 teeth and sent me flying. I cracked my head open on the concrete floor. When I came to, the pain was intense. The worst part was that I lay there for almost 2 hours. My mom finally came home and took me to the hospital. He was pure evil. He had been upset because I was begging him to make me dinner, a baked potato, and I had interrupted his drinking time in the basement. I would have made it myself, but I was not allowed to. My wife is always shocked when I tell her stories about him. That was definitely one of the worst incidents. Story 5. Fractured Skull. The footage is from an independent professional wrestling match where a spot went wrong. Warning. I have long red hair. No blood is visible, only my hair. On the stretcher I thought, this is the worst pain I have ever felt. I need to remember that for when people ask. Story 6. It was an inch-long splinter that went all the way through my fingertip sideways, between the fingernail and the bone. That might not sound so bad. Story 7. Molten welding slag bounced off the inside of my mask and into my ear canal. There was so much pain and white flashes that I almost passed out. I heard sizzling and popping as I threw my gear off. It melted in and healed over for a few days until I could bear touching it enough to dig the metal back out. I wear earplugs when welding now. Story 8. My molar shattered, became infected, and an abscess formed that caused half of my face to swell like a balloon. I had no dental insurance and was working for minimum wage, so I could not get it treated right away, and it turned into that situation. I did not sleep for 2 days and was standing in my bathroom trying to work up the courage to pull the tooth with a pair of pliers when my roommate finally found a dentist who would see me for an extraction. I was in such bad shape that they could not fully numb me, and they had to perform the extraction with inadequate anesthesia. It was the worst pain I have ever felt, but the relief when the pressure released and the pus drained was almost orgasmic. It hurt so much that a freshly removed molar socket bleeding felt good by comparison. Since then, I have read that a significant number of suicides are directly attributable to tooth pain. After that experience, I can believe it. Story 9. Crohn's disease is like someone punching their fist through your abdomen, grabbing a handful of intestines and ripping them out. It is pure agony. It makes you scream and contort your body into strange positions seeking the slightest relief. But there is none. It is blindingly painful. I remember rocking back and forth, doubled over, screaming into a pillow. Add constant nausea and vomiting and inability to eat, weight loss, and muscle weakness. I can see why the writer of the film Alien used his personal experience with Crohn's disease as inspiration for the chest-bursting scene. If you can imagine having something moving inside you and tearing through your organs, that is what Crohn's disease can feel like. Story 10. Root canal with no anesthetic. I gripped my belt so hard that I ripped the buckle out of the leather. I never went back to that dentist. Story 11. I was rear-ended at a red light by a very large truck. I did not see it coming. I had even checked my rearview mirror. The truck was going very fast and the impact was severe. I felt like the G-force lingered in my back for weeks. I suffered a concussion and 2 cervical disc ruptures. I was very dizzy. 2 weeks later, I began fainting and having full-body convulsions that occurred after intense back spasms that traveled from top to bottom. I experienced an erratic heart rate that felt like mini heart attacks and severe anxiety. A warm or hot shower would make me extremely dizzy. I was practically bedridden for months, in excruciating pain and even contemplating ending my life. But thank God, my prayers were answered. I am walking and moving and no longer in constant pain and spasms. In 2024, my only focus was recovery. I am moving forward with my life now. Story 12. Childbirth lasted 36 hours. My skin tore down to the muscle, and I did not even feel it because the pain was at that level. Story 13. Burst appendix. Fortunately, it burst while I was already in a hospital bed waiting for it to be removed because it was inflamed. When it burst, it was the scariest moment of my life. My body went ice cold and every hair stood on end. Tears streamed down my face and I began to shake uncontrollably. It felt like the inside of my stomach had become lava, burning the surrounding organs. The doctor took one look at me and nurses wheeled me into the operating room. The appendicitis pain was severe, about 7 to 8 out of 10. But the moment it burst and my body went into panic was something I had only ever experienced once. Story 14. I had an ingrown toenail removed with a scalpel by a podiatrist without pain relief. I passed out from the pain, and the practitioner then said he had never done it before and was not expecting so much blood. Story 15. My disc between the 6th and 7th cervical vertebrae spontaneously ruptured in my sleep 3 years ago and compressed my spinal cord. I used to think I had a high pain tolerance until my brain became convinced that my right arm was simultaneously submerged in liquid fire and being torn off in slow motion. It turns out there is physical pain so severe that you would consider harming yourself to escape it. Story 16. I quit benzodiazepines cold turkey after many years of use and alcohol consumption. I experienced nerve pain around the clock, seizures, and constant panic. It took more than 3 years to feel normal again. Story 17. I was run over by a car at 70 kilometers per hour on a 30 kilometers per hour street. The elderly woman did not see me and hit me. I remember the instinct to try to push the car away with my hands, but it did not work. I bashed my head against her windshield and was launched another 6 meters into the air. Basically a hard reboot of Windows. When Windows finally restarted, I was on the other side of the road and the elderly woman was crying over me. I had to tell her twice to stop crying and call the ambulance because she was in shock. I rolled over to the curb and landed in a pool of frozen water at 2 degrees Celsius. I grabbed my cell phone but could not touch it because my hands were covered in blood. The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later. My wife was in the front seat. I did not know that at the time. I was frantically trying to solve as many equations in my head as I could, since I am a mathematician, just to make sure my brain still worked. A friend of mine had a similar accident and was never the same. The rest is boring. Many broken bones and lifelong injuries, but my head works, or at least I like to think that it does. Story 18. When I was hit by a car and broke my back, what scared me most was when the sensation started to fade and I lost all feeling in the lower half of my body. For the next 3 days, I could not feel anything below my rib cage. It was not until the middle of the night when I woke up that I realized my legs hurt like hell. I knew I was going to be okay. Story 19. I never knew how much a bad toothache could completely disable me until recently. Story 20. Ovarian cyst rupture. I have endometriosis with lesions on my bladder and ureters. When a cyst ruptured on my right ovary, the pain was severe. Felt like my pelvic region was being shredded. I have had my heel bone broken and reset to fix the arch of my foot, and that was not as painful as the cyst rupture. Story 21. I had stage 4 cancer when it spread to my sinuses. No opioids would touch the pain. Felt like my teeth were trying to break out. Story 22. My child jumped on my crotch 3 hours after a vasectomy. I felt something pop and instant pain, and I was still taking painkillers. It swelled so much it looked like a cross between a grapefruit and an avocado. The bruising took over 6 months to fade. Story 23. Herniated disc at the 4th lumbar vertebra. I went from working out every day to barely being able to walk. That lasted for years. Whenever the injury reactivates, I spend a few days in bed. The worst part is that there is no position where it does not hurt. There are only positions that make it hurt less. 10 years later, I no longer feel pain, but every now and then I will accidentally reactivate the injury, reminding me that it is still there. Story 24. I suffered a large second-degree burn after spilling boiling water on myself. Story 25. Crohn's disease flare-up. This was before I was diagnosed and I had no idea what was happening. I could not move and was screaming in pain for the first time in my life. Story 26. Labor was followed closely by a cesarean section without sufficient anesthesia. Story 27. An abscess tooth later required a root canal. The root canal provided relief by removing the pressure when the dentist drained the pus. The problem began during the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic, then disappeared and returned 18 months later. I am not sure how my dentist did not catch it, since I visited 2 or 3 times during that period. Story 28. Hemorrhoid surgery involves surgically removing tissue from the anal area, and you will still need to pass stool afterward. Story 29. My first Crohn's flare-up landed me in the emergency room. I literally had to crawl from the bathroom into my bedroom. I thought I was dying. Story 30. I woke from a 9-hour surgery in which roughly half my intestines were removed and was denied pain medication because the anesthesiologist administered the wrong drugs during the procedure. There was unexpected construction on the building, so I woke in a tiny 8 by 8 foot shared room next to someone with a mild kidney stone who had about 7 adults and 2 wailing children visiting. I was fainting from the pain, sweating heavily, and was told I was being disruptive because of my gasps and labored breathing into my pillow. After many hours, much of which is hazy because I kept blacking out, I finally got a room of my own with low-dose pain medication that only reduced the pain to about 8.5 out of 10. The massive incision took 9 months to close. From start to finish, it was a horrific experience. I have a fairly high threshold for pain, but this almost broke my spirit. Story 31. It felt as if I had shattered every bone in my foot, yet only a few tiny scratches were visible. Being stung in the foot by fire coral caused 10 out of 10 pain with sweating and trembling for about an hour and a half. It got to the point I would have considered amputation if it had stopped the pain. Nothing I did provided any relief. It turns out you are supposed to soak this kind of injury in salt water, not fresh water. I am not sure how much of a difference that would have made. Story 32. I had a cervical biopsy. My gynecologist thought I might have cancer. It was only precancerous, thank God. The biopsy was horrifically painful. I screamed and a nurse came into the room to hold my hand. When it was over, I was shaking, crying, and bleeding, and the doctor looked at me as if he had never seen me before. 10 years later, I can still feel it in my memory, and I am so glad I had a hysterectomy soon after. I cannot imagine going through that procedure again. Story 33. I broke my pelvis in 7 places. I was in the hospital for 5 weeks. I did not have a bowel movement for 3 days. After 4 enemas, the pain of passing a very large stool rivaled the pain from the car accident. The nurses said it may have reopened some of my fractures. Story 34. I posted this on another thread. An abscess tooth exploded my face. I was the director of one of the largest museums in the United States and walked on stage to give a controversial presentation. I was already nervous. There was a loud bang from the center of my head. I did not feel my body drop, but I could tell I had hit the floor. My vision blurred and turned red, and in the 3 seconds after the bang, I concluded that I had been shot and had seconds to live. I am a very large man, and as I faded, I saw my friend, the 90-pound, 40-kilogram museum nurse, trying to pull me up. I was in shock. The pain did not really faze me, but it hurt. Indescribable agony in 2 seconds made death seem like mercy. I accepted very calmly that my nurse friend's face would be the last thing I would ever see and lost consciousness. I experienced a dramatic near-death and lived to tell it. I woke up 4 hours later in a hospital after emergency surgery. I had not been shot. I had an abscessed wisdom tooth that had become highly infected, and the abscess exploded upward into my head, splitting the tooth from tip to jawbone and breaking my left upper jaw. It erupted with such force that my eyes bled and the pain knocked me out. While I was unconscious, my wisdom tooth was pulled without anesthetic and the infection was drained. I still get phantom twitches just thinking about it. Edit. I did not expect such a large response. To answer questions, yes, I had had a toothache for a few days and had an appointment 2 days later to have it checked. I had been soothing it with toothache mouthwash effectively. I am an evolutionary biologist, and the presentation was about accepting certain facets of evolutionary science to move forward in medical knowledge. Our museum is in the South, in a county where 70% of residents do not believe in evolution or climate change. It was a hot-button topic. Not many people knew this was possible, including some medical professionals who later worked on repairing my face. They said it was an absolute freak incident that required precisely perfect conditions. Yes, I do have some post-traumatic stress related to it. I go to the dentist at least 6 times a year now and have considered having all of my teeth removed on multiple occasions. I get little twitches from where nerves were cut, and my heart sinks. I wince and sometimes cry or whimper, not from pain, but from fear that it is happening again. I avoid foods that may cause tooth decay or pain, which has been great for my health overall. Thanks for checking in. Story 35. If I had a toothache before modern dentistry, I probably would have killed myself. I'm sorry you're expressing that. If you are thinking about harming yourself or are in immediate danger, please call your local emergency number now. If you are in the United States, you can call or text 988 for immediate help. Please reach out to someone you trust or a mental health professional. Are you safe right now? I can help find local resources if you want. Story 36. Brown recluse spider bite. Felt like kittens were in my calf, clawing their way out and up my leg. The bite was above my ankle. Story 37. I had an abscess on my jaw as a complication of an infection after having my wisdom teeth pulled a few weeks earlier. The pressure, pain, and sleepless nights were too much. I begged my dental surgeon to squeeze me in for an appointment to drain it. The anesthesia did not take effect for some reason, and I experienced the entire procedure. At one point my spirit felt like it had left my body. I dissociated, praying for the ordeal to end. That night was the worst of my life. Felt like my jaw was going to fall off. My wife had to change the sheets because of the sweating. A cooling pad felt too cold and a warm pad felt like lava. I stripped and stayed in the shower under running water until dawn. I am traumatized. I have been unpacking the experience with my therapist. It happened in November. That pain took me to a very dark place. Story 38. I pulled my loose tooth with my bare hands when I was 8. My parents' sink, my mouth, and my hands were covered in blood, like a horror slasher movie, and I could hear it tear in my mouth. Thinking about it now, I was so badass that night. Story 39. I was kicked in the testicles, suffered months of pain, and had to have an ultrasound. Story 40. Honestly, I think some emotional pain manifested in the worst physical pain I have ever felt. Story 41. I was at work at the good old Bell when I picked up a case of 10-inch tortillas to put on a waist-high shelf because my truck had arrived and I was organizing the store before vacation in 2 days. I picked up the case from a waist-high stack and went to put it on the shelf. When my spine collapsed, herniating several discs at once and rendering me immediately unable to straighten up, I could stand but could not support my upper body weight. I stifled my screams because my crew that morning were almost all teenagers. My first instinct, even hurt, was not to scare them. I got one of my crew to bring me a rolling cart and called my mother to take me to the hospital. I actually sat down and finished my schedule for the next 2 weeks, figuring I was going to be out that long. You would think that was the worst pain I'd ever felt, but it was only the background to the worst pain. Workers' compensation did everything they could to avoid operating on my back. Every non-invasive procedure plus physical therapy. As my eventual surgeon said, you cannot therapy away a broken spine. You have to fix it. After a year of following every recommendation and still being severely disabled, they told me they were going to send me to a doctor for injections in my spine to help block the pain. I remembered having an epidural during childbirth and thought it would be okay. I was wrong. The table at the doctor's office held you in what could best be described as doggy style, elevated at waist height. Strapped to the table on my hands and knees with my rear in the air, they positioned a machine above me that provided live X-ray imaging so the doctor could see where he was placing the needles. At first, the position was only mildly embarrassing and uncomfortable. The nurse was reassuring and laughing at my jokes. Then he placed a needle, and I came off that table so fast and started screaming like never before. It took both of them to hold me down, and they had to shout that I would hurt myself so I would stop, because the needles were still in place and I could not move. I was crying, apologizing, begging them not to do it again, unable to control myself and pleading for my life. They removed everything and took me to recovery, where I was still crying. The nurse broke down, and I could hear the doctor comforting her and saying he had no idea what had happened. About an hour later, he came back and showed me pictures on his tablet of my spine. Due to the location of my injury, lumbar vertebrae L2 through L5, the herniated discs had pushed everything in that area of my lower back out of place and had displaced both sciatic nerves upward and away from where they usually sit. That explained why I had been unable to straighten up earlier. He had inadvertently and apologetically placed a needle directly into one of my sciatic nerves. I thanked him for explaining and told him I did not blame him or the nurse, but that I would never, ever do that again. The worst pain I have ever felt, as a woman who has both broken her spine and had a child get stuck during birth, was when a doctor accidentally put a needle directly into my sciatic nerve. I cannot describe the pain. Blind, unthinking, incredible pain like nothing I've felt before. When I finally left, my mother was being watched by security because she had heard me scream in reception and they had to hold her back. Several people asked if I was okay. Story 42. Shingles on my face. I would not wish that on my worst enemy. I am still on medication for it a year later. The pain is hard to describe. Story 43. I was stung on my forearm by a tarantula hawk. The pain was the most overwhelming thing I have ever experienced. It dropped me to the ground instantly. I vomited and involuntarily urinated. I was unaware I had done so and did not even realize I was screaming. Felt like a nightmare, and I wanted to die. About 10 minutes after being stung, the pain disappeared. I was completely spent, soaked with urine, tears, and sweat, and caked with dirt from rolling on the ground. I would rather endure gallbladder attacks than be stung again. So yeah, good times. Story 44. If you had asked me a month ago, I would have said maybe childbirth. But after losing my husband, I have felt an emotional pain that turned physical, and I have been hurting in a way I never thought possible. Story 45. Dry heaving and vomiting. It literally feels like you are trying to puke out your lungs. Horrible pain. Story 46. I had a fungal ear infection. I have no idea where I got it. The pain radiated down my neck and through my head. It left me doubled over and crying for my mother. I have not had one since, but I still have the eardrops I was prescribed, just in case. Story 47. Gout. Everyone I have ever mentioned it to thinks it is a joke, and it is fucking agony. Dental abscesses are never nice either. Story 48. When I broke my leg, it wasn't the fracture itself but the intense pain when they moved it in the splint. It caused massive pain each time, and I can still remember it. Story 49. A mountain bike injury led to a type 2 acromioclavicular separation and a partial biceps tear. My girlfriend forgot about it and yanked my arm up during sexual activity about 2 weeks later. I could have headbutted her. I have never felt anything worse in my life. Story 50. I survived the common cold. As a man, I now understand the pain a woman experiences during childbirth. Story 51. I used a dermatologic cream called Effudex on my neck to eliminate precancerous growths. I have used this medication many times. It is very much like a chemical peel, and the harsher the reaction, the more effective it is. It looked like a severe second-degree burn and basically wiped away the uppermost layer of skin. Apparently, I put the cream on before I went to bed. I never thought about it, but I must have rubbed my neck while asleep and then reached down and rubbed my scrotum. The next morning my scrotum was completely red, very tender to the touch, and I could not walk, sit, or wear anything. I sat in the living room chair naked because anything I wore hurt terribly. I used heat and cold packs and anything else I could. The outermost layer of skin was missing and my scrotum was completely raw. It was the most intense pain I have ever felt. It lasted a full week. The dermatologist laughed and said, "I guess you will not ever do that again." Story 52. One time I had a vertigo attack so violent that it caused the worst migraine I had ever experienced. I had already thrown up multiple times and was dry heaving constantly. I had also injured myself in a fall caused by vision loss. Story 53. Do-it-yourself plantar wart removal from the bottom of my foot. I had it for a few weeks while I was in the Navy, and it was extremely painful. Medical staff kept giving me acetaminophen and telling me to wash it. Eventually, I was using a cane, and I begged the doctor to do something. He said he would give me a scalpel, but that I needed gloves and the strongest whiskey I could get. When I asked if the whiskey was for disinfecting, he said it was for pain relief and told me to take a big shot before starting to cut and another if it became too painful. It hurt terribly. I nearly blacked out from the pain and there was a lot of blood. It did not fix the problem. I only had a painful hole in my foot, and a week later the wart was back. I eventually saw a dermatologist who removed it fairly painlessly in one session. Story 54. I had a severe gallbladder infection that was about to burst. I could not keep anything down, not even water. I arrived at the doctor's office on time, and they scheduled the surgery within a few days. The pain before and after surgery was not as bad as when they removed that drainage tube. I have had some serious accidents in my life. Even the pain of 3 births was nothing compared with that. The drainage tube was the worst. Story 55. Rhabdomyolysis in my thighs. Felt like being stabbed to death. The pain was so intense that I laughed uncontrollably. This is an automatic reaction by the body to release endorphins that help reduce the pain. Story 56. As someone who has never experienced childbirth, a herniated disc, or a fractured skull, I cannot relate to most people on this thread, but my worst experience was a panic attack. It was more embarrassing than painful. Lying in the bathtub, vomiting and convinced you are dying and that these are your last seconds is very strange. Story 57. You know how your knee bends? Mine bent the other way, forward and to the side at once. Story 58. An obscure condition called coital cephalalgia. In my 20s, I was home alone taking a shower and taking care of business. Within a split second, the most intense pain of my life erupted inside my skull. I thought I was having an aneurysm and dying. Wrapped in a towel, I paced and did Lamaze breathing. My mother used it for her endometriosis pain, and I prayed it would pass. It did not. I was terrified and called my boyfriend's mother, who was not home. I called emergency services but was too frightened to stay on the line, so I hung up. They called me back and firefighters arrived before the ambulance. My brain was exploding with pain, but I somehow kept it together. When I saw my brother walking down the driveway, I started bawling. The doctor at the hospital could not figure it out and attributed it to cluster migraines because my father had them. A few weeks later, my boyfriend was over and I suddenly realized that having an orgasm was causing this head-splitting pain. We went to the hospital and I had to tell a very attractive doctor what I had been doing alone in the shower and why I knew what was causing it. He came back excited and said he had to look it up in 3 different books to find out what it was. Thankfully, it did not happen often, and I could usually feel when it would hit if I continued. The pain was sudden and incredibly intense. If it had been my arm or my stomach, it might not have felt as bad. But when it is your brain, it is awful. Story 59. I had an intrauterine device inserted and experienced pain for about a week. I woke in the middle of the night in such pain I could hardly move. I managed with ibuprofen, acetaminophen, and cannabidiol. Story 60. The most painful injury I remember is when my entire toenail was torn off and barely hanging on. I went to the emergency room. The doctor injected the area where the toenail had been to numb it, then grabbed the nail and pulled it out 2 seconds later. The shot did not help. I had to wear steel-toe boots at work on an assembly line the next day. A close second was having a rhino rocket inflated in my nose to stop a nosebleed that would not stop. It was 3 days of brutal pain and a constant runny nose. Story 61. Bowel obstruction. Childbirth was a walk in the park by comparison. Story 62. An abscess developed because a crown was improperly placed after a root canal. A tiny hole allowed bacteria to build up until the pain became so severe I could not walk. It took 3 days to get a dental appointment, and I begged them to extract the tooth. I watched in the reflection of the doctor's glasses as they operated on my mouth. Although the tooth and pain were treated, I had nightmares for weeks and still get panic attacks at the thought of going to a dentist. Story 63. Cesarean section recovery. I delivered 1 twin vaginally, then had a cesarean section for the second. When the doctors went in to deliver the second baby, they cut my abdominal muscles vertically in a classical cesarean section. I am not sure what they did inside, but during recovery it felt like the muscles in my groin were ripping open every time I stood, took a step, or moved too quickly. Recovering from both types of birth was hard, and I also had to walk frequently after discharge to visit my boys in the neonatal intensive care unit. Each trip for weeks felt like I was being torn apart from the inside. Story 64. I experienced electrical shocks when the doctors tested my automatic implantable cardioverter defibrillator, a pacemaker and defibrillator combination, while I was under twilight sedation. It also discharged twice over 12 years. 875 volts passed through my nervous system faster than the blink of an eye. There is also post-traumatic stress disorder, but the question was about physical pain. I used to think kidney stones were the worst. Story 65. Miscarriage. I thought I was dying. Part of my body was literally failing, and I was convinced I was actually dying on the bathroom floor. I should have gone to the hospital, but I fell asleep on the floor instead. I acknowledge how dangerous that was and that I could have died from complications. The physical pain was the worst I have ever felt, and the emotional pain only made it worse. Story 66. I had a medication abortion years ago, and they had me take the medication orally, which is important to know because some of the worst symptoms and side effects can be avoided by inserting the pills as a vaginal suppository instead. I went home a few hours later and ingested the 4 pills to induce bleeding. Not even 30 minutes later, I started violently vomiting everything I had eaten that day. Then I began having severe waves of lower back pain. I was on the floor of my shower for 3 straight hours, frozen in complete agony. Intense cramping followed, and I experienced incontinence and more vomiting. I will never forget when my boyfriend spoke to me. I looked up and he was shocked and horrified because my face was completely pale. The bleeding was heavy and intense. I will spare any gory details. The back pain combined with the uterine cramping was some of the most agonizing physical pain I have experienced, and it lasted about 5 or 6 hours before it slowly subsided and I went to bed. If that is what labor is supposed to feel like, even if it is only a taste of the real thing, I am terrified of ever giving birth, to be honest. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.